The whispers started the moment Willa Preston's belly began to show, and by the time she could no longer hide it beneath her shawls, the good people of Ordway, Colorado had already condemned her to hell. It was the summer of 1878, and the dusty streets of Ordway seemed to crackle with more than just the dry heat that swept across the plains. Willa had lived her entire 22 years in this town, the daughter of a schoolteacher who had died when she was 16 and a mother who had followed him into the grave 2 years later. She had been courted by Thomas Grayson, the banker's son, a man who had promised her the world with his smooth words and gentle touches. But when she told him about the baby growing inside her, he disappeared faster than morning dew on a summer day. His father sent him east to Philadelphia, and the Graysons made it clear to everyone in town that their son had been seduced by a loose woman. Willa stood in the general store on a sweltering August morning, her hands trembling as she tried to count out coins for flour and beans. The proprietor's wife, Mrs. Hendricks, looked at her with such disdain that Willa felt it like a physical blow. "I am not sure we can serve your kind here anymore," Mrs. Hendricks said, her voice dripping with venom. "Decent folk shop here." Willa's throat tightened. "Please, I need food. Should have thought about that before you spread your legs for a man who was not your husband." Mrs. Hendricks turned away, busying herself with straightening jars on a shelf. Willa left the coins on the counter and walked out empty-handed, her vision blurred with tears she refused to shed in public. The street seemed longer than usual as she made her way back to the small cabin she had inherited from her parents. Women pulled their children away from her path as though sin were contagious. Men stared with expressions that ranged from disgust to something far worse, something that made her skin crawl. She had nowhere to go, no family, no friends who would risk their own reputations by associating with her. The church had made their position clear when Reverend Thompson publicly declared her a fallen woman who needed to repent, though he offered no practical assistance beyond prayer and judgment. That evening, as Willa sat in her cabin wondering how she would survive, she heard the sound of an axe splitting wood. She peered out her window and saw a massive figure in her small yard, methodically working through the pile of logs that had sat untouched for months. The man was enormous, with shoulders that seemed broader than her doorframe and arms thick with muscle that flexed with each powerful swing. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, and a thick beard covered his jaw. He wore buckskin pants and a worn shirt that strained against his chest. Willa wrapped a shawl around herself despite the heat and stepped outside. "Excuse me, sir?" The man paused mid-swing and turned to face her. His eyes were a startling gray, like storm clouds over the mountains, and his face was weathered by sun and wind. He looked to be perhaps 30 years old, though it was hard to tell beneath the beard. "You're Miss Preston?" His voice was deep and rough, like gravel rolling down a hillside. "I am. Who are you?" "Quincy Whitmore. I've been up in the mountains trapping. Came into town for supplies and heard some things." He set the axe down and wiped his brow with the back of his hand. "Heard a woman was being treated poorly. Figured I would help." Willa felt a surge of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. "Why would you do that? You do not even know me." Quincy shrugged his massive shoulders. "Do not need to know you to know that what this town is doing is wrong. A woman alone and with child deserves help, not scorn." "They will turn on you too if you associate with me," Willa warned, though her heart desperately hoped he would not listen. "Let them try." There was no bravado in his words, just simple fact. Quincy Whitmore looked like a man who had never feared anything in his life. Over the next few days, Quincy became a constant presence. He repaired her roof, fixed her broken fence, and hunted game that he left on her doorstep. Willa tried to pay him, but he refused her money. Instead, he would sit on her porch in the evenings and they would talk as the sun set over the plains. She learned that he had come west from Missouri as a boy, that he had lost his parents to cholera, and that he had spent the last dozen years living in the mountains, only coming to civilization when he needed supplies or when winter drove him down from the high country. "Do you not get lonely up there?" Willa asked one evening, bringing him a cup of coffee. It was all she had to offer, and he accepted it gratefully. "Sometimes," Quincy admitted, "but people down here can be cruel. Animals are honest. The mountains do not judge. And yet here you are, helping someone the whole town is judged." He looked at her with those storm-gray eyes. "Maybe I got tired of running from people." Willa felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer heat. For the first time since Thomas had abandoned her, she did not feel entirely alone. But the town's harassment only intensified. One morning, Willa woke to find garbage thrown in her yard and the word whore painted across her door in crude red letters. She stood staring at it, feeling the last of her strength crumble. She sank to her knees on the doorstep, her hands covering her face. That was how Quincy found her when he arrived with a deer he had killed. He took one look at the door, and his jaw tightened into a hard line. Without a word, he lifted Willa to her feet with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his size. "Pack your things," he said quietly. "What? You're not staying here. I'm taking you somewhere else." "I have nowhere to go," Willa said, her voice breaking. "This is my home." "This is not a home. It is a prison." Quincy cupped her face in his large, calloused hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I know a place, a town up in the mountains called Silver Ridge. It is small, but the people there are different. They mind their own business and they help their neighbors. You will be safe there." "Why are you doing this?" Willa whispered. "Why do you care so much about what happens to me?" Quincy's expression softened. "Because I have seen too much cruelty in this world, and I have done nothing about it for too long. Because you deserve better than this. And because—" He hesitated, then continued. "Because when I look at you, I do not see a fallen woman. I see someone who had the misfortune of loving the wrong man. That is not a sin. That is just being human." Willa felt tears stream down her face. "I am afraid." "I know. But you are also strong. Stronger than anyone in this town." His thumbs gently wiped away her tears. "Come with me. Please." It took Willa less than an hour to pack everything she owned into a single trunk and a few bags. She had so little left of her old life. Quincy loaded her belongings onto a sturdy pack horse and helped her onto his own massive gelding, settling her in front of him so she could ride securely. His arms came around her to hold the reins, and Willa felt safer than she had in months. They left Ordway as the sun climbed high in the sky. Willa did not look back. She could not bear to see the place that had been her home for her entire life, the place that had turned against her so completely. The journey to Silver Ridge took 5 days. They traveled northwest through the Colorado Plains and into the foothills of the Rockies. Quincy proved to be a capable guide, finding sheltered places to camp each night and providing food from his hunting. He treated Willa with such gentle respect that she sometimes had to remind herself that he was not a dream conjured by her desperate loneliness. On the 3rd night, as they sat by the fire, Willa finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why do you really do this, Quincy? There must be more to it than simple kindness." He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "I had a sister once," he finally said. "Emma. She was a year younger than me. When I was 16 and she was 15, a man in our town took advantage of her. She got with child. Our parents were already dead by then, and I did not know how to help her. The town treated her the same way Ordway treated you. His voice grew rough. She could not take it. She walked into the river one night and did not come back out." Willa's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, Quincy, I'm so sorry. I've lived with that guilt every day since. I was too young, too stupid to know what to do. I ran to the mountains because I could not face what I had failed to prevent." He looked at her then, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "When I heard what was happening to you, I knew I could not stand by and do nothing again. I could not save Emma, but maybe I could save you." Without thinking, Willa moved closer to him and took his large hand in both of hers. "You did not fail your sister. You were just a boy yourself. What happened to her was not your fault." "I know that in my head," Quincy said quietly, "but my heart has never believed it." "Then let me help your heart understand," Willa said softly, "by letting you help me, by showing you that your kindness matters." Quincy turned his hand over and laced his fingers through hers. They sat like that until the fire burned low, 2 wounded souls finding solace in each other's presence. The terrain grew more rugged as they climbed into the mountains. Pines replaced the scrub grass of the plains, and the air turned cooler and sweeter. Willa found herself breathing more easily, as though the weight of Ordway's judgment was physically lifting from her shoulders with each mile they traveled. On the afternoon of the 5th day, they crested a ridge and Quincy pointed down into a green valley below. There. That is Silver Ridge. The town was smaller than Ordway, perhaps 24 buildings clustered along a clear stream that ran through the valley. The mountains rose protectively on all sides, their peaks still capped with snow even in late summer. It looked like something from a dream, peaceful and remote. As they rode into town, Willa noticed that people stopped to stare, but the expressions on their faces were curious rather than hostile. A woman sweeping the porch of what appeared to be a boarding house smiled and waved. A group of children playing in the street called out greetings to Quincy, who waved back. "You are known here?" Willa asked. "I stop through sometimes. Trade furs, buy supplies. They are good people." He guided the horse to a stop in front of a small log cabin at the edge of town. "This is mine. I built it a few years back for when I need to be down from the high country. You can stay here." "Where will you stay?" "I have a camp up the mountain. I will be nearby." He dismounted and then lifted Willa down with ease, his hands spanning her waist. She felt small next to his bulk, but protected rather than overwhelmed. The cabin was simple but well built, with a stone fireplace, a sturdy bed, a table, and 2 chairs. It was clean and dry, with windows that let in the afternoon light. "It is not much," Quincy said, looking almost embarrassed. "It is perfect," Willa said honestly. After the way she had been living in Ordway, constantly afraid and alone, this felt like a palace. They unloaded her belongings, and then Quincy built up a fire in the fireplace. "I will introduce you around tomorrow," he said. "Let you get settled tonight. There is food in the chest there, and water in the barrel outside. You need anything, you come find me. My camp is about a mile up the trail behind the cabin." "Thank you, Quincy." Willa did not know how else to express the gratitude and something more that filled her heart. "For everything." He paused at the door, his large frame filling it completely. "You do not have to thank me, Willa. Just promise me you will give yourself a chance at happiness here." "I promise to try." After he left, Willa explored her new home more thoroughly. She found that Quincy had stocked it with flour, beans, coffee, and dried meat. There were blankets on the bed that smelled of pine and fresh air. As darkness fell, she lay down for the first time in months without fear, and slept more deeply than she had since her world had fallen apart. True to his word, Quincy arrived the next morning to introduce her to the town. Their first stop was the general store, run by a weathered but kind-faced man named Mr. Chen, who had come from China to work on the railroads and stayed in the mountains. "Any friend of Quincy is welcome here," Mr. Chen said warmly. "You need anything, you let me know. We take care of each other in Silver Ridge." They met the boarding house owner, Mrs. Sullivan, a widow with gray hair and sharp eyes that softened when she looked at Willa's pregnant belly. "When are you due, dear?" "November, I think," Willa said quietly, waiting for the judgment. "That is wonderful. We could use more children in this town. Gets too quiet in the winter." She patted Willa's hand. "You come by for tea sometime. I would love the company." Everywhere they went, Willa was greeted with warmth or at least polite neutrality. No one asked invasive questions about her situation. No one called her names or looked at her with disgust. By the end of the day, she felt as though she had stepped into another world entirely. "I do not understand," she said to Quincy as they walked back to the cabin. "Why are these people so different?" "Most folks here came to Silver Ridge because they did not fit somewhere else," Quincy explained. "Mr. Chen was not welcome in many towns because of his race. Mrs. Sullivan's husband was an outlaw who reformed, and she stood by him even when her own family disowned her. The blacksmith lost his arm in the war and could not find work in the cities because people thought he was useless. Here, we all have our stories. We all know what it is like to be judged. So we choose not to do it to others." Willa felt tears prick her eyes. "I wish every place was like this." "So do I," Quincy said quietly. Over the following weeks, Willa settled into life in Silver Ridge. She found work helping Mrs. Sullivan at the boarding house, cleaning rooms and cooking meals. The pay was modest, but it was enough for her to begin saving money. Her belly grew rounder, and so did the community's protective circle around her. Quincy was a constant presence in her life, though he maintained a respectful distance. He brought her firewood and meat from his hunts. He walked her home from the boarding house in the evenings. He fixed anything in the cabin that needed repair. But he never presumed anything, never made her feel obligated or uncomfortable. It was Willa who found herself wanting more. She caught herself watching for him each day, her heart lifting when she saw his tall figure striding down from the mountain. She loved the way he was so gentle despite his size, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way his deep voice made her feel safe. One evening in late September, as they sat on the cabin's small porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink, Willa finally found the courage to speak. "Quincy, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Why have you never married? A man like you, I would think women would be lining up." He chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "A man like me spends most of his time in the mountains, miles from anywhere. That's not much of a life to offer someone. But you are here now. You have been here all month." "I have had reason to stay," he said quietly, looking at her with those storm-gray eyes. Willa's breath caught. "What reason?" "You know the reason, Willa." His voice was gentle but direct. "I think you have known it for a while, same as I have." "Tell me anyway," she whispered. "I need to hear you say it." Quincy reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "I am falling in love with you. Maybe I started falling that first day in Ordway when you came out to see who was chopping your wood. You looked so tired, so worn down, but there was still fire in your eyes, still fight in you, and every day since, that feeling has grown stronger." Willa's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy this time. "I love you too. I've been so afraid to say it, afraid you would think I was just grateful or using you." "Are you sure it is love and not just gratitude?" Quincy asked seriously. "I would never hold that against you, Willa. What I feel for you does not require anything in return." "I am sure," Willa said firmly. She took his large hand and pressed it against her chest, over her racing heart. "I am sure because when I think about my future, I cannot imagine it without you. I am sure because you are the first thing I think of when I wake, and the last thing I think of before I sleep. I am sure because when you touch me, I feel like I am home for the first time in my life." Quincy made a sound deep in his throat and pulled her into his arms, careful of her belly. He held her as though she were precious and fragile, his face buried in her hair. "I want to marry you," he said against her temple. "But I want you to be sure. I want you to have time to heal from what happened, to know your own mind without the fear of being alone coloring your choices." "I am sure now," Willa insisted, pulling back to look at him. "But if you need time to trust that, I will wait. I will wait as long as you need." Quincy cupped her face in his hands and kissed her forehead, then her cheeks, and finally, with heartbreaking gentleness, her lips. It was nothing like the fumbling kisses she had shared with Thomas. This was deep and true, a promise sealed with touch. "I do not need time to know my own heart," Quincy said when they finally broke apart. "I will marry you tomorrow if you will have me. But I want to make sure you are choosing me because you love me, not because you need protection." "Can it not be both?" Willa asked. "I do love you, Quincy, with everything I am. But I also love that you protect me. I love that I feel safe with you. Those things are not separate. They are all part of why I love you." He smiled then, a full, genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. "Then I will talk to Reverend Miller tomorrow. He is the circuit preacher who comes through Silver Ridge. He is due in next week." "Next week," Willa repeated, her heart soaring. "I can wait one more week to become your wife." They sat together until full dark, making quiet plans for their future. Quincy talked about building a bigger cabin for the three of them, maybe closer to town so Willa would not be isolated during the long winters. Willa talked about the garden she wanted to plant in the spring, about teaching the baby to read from the books her father had left her. The next morning, Quincy went to speak with Mrs. Sullivan about arranging a small wedding while Willa worked her shift at the boarding house. She could barely contain her joy, and Mrs. Sullivan noticed immediately. "You have got the look of a woman in love," the older woman said with a knowing smile. "Would that man be Quincy Whitmore by any chance?" "He asked me to marry him," Willa confessed. "Or rather, I suppose we asked each other." Mrs. Sullivan laughed and pulled her into a hug. "That's wonderful news, dear. He is a good man, one of the best I have ever known, and it is clear as day that he worships the ground you walk on." "I still cannot believe this is all real," Willa admitted. 2 months ago, I thought my life was over. Now I'm about to marry a man I love in a town that has welcomed me with open arms." "That is the thing about life," Mrs. Sullivan said wisely. "It can turn on a dime. The trick is being brave enough to accept the good when it comes, same as you endure the bad." The week passed in a flurry of preparations. Mrs. Sullivan insisted on making Willa a new dress for the wedding, a simple blue calico that accommodated her belly and brought out the color of her eyes. Mr. Chen donated food for a small celebration. The blacksmith, a taciturn man named John with only one arm, made them a beautiful set of iron hooks for their cabin as a wedding gift. Willa was overwhelmed by the generosity and kindness of these people who had been strangers just weeks ago. In Ordway, people she had known her entire life had turned on her without mercy. Here, people who barely knew her treated her like family. Quincy was a constant presence during that week, though he maintained propriety by continuing to sleep at his camp. They spent every evening together, talking and dreaming and learning each other's hearts. Willa learned that Quincy loved books but had few chances to read them. She learned that he could identify 100 different bird calls and that he knew the mountains like some men know their own homes. She learned that beneath his rough exterior was a man of surprising gentleness and deep thought. Quincy learned that Willa had a quick wit and a talent for storytelling. He learned that she could calculate numbers in her head faster than most people could with pencil and paper, a skill her schoolteacher father had taught her. He learned that she was brave in ways large and small, that her kindness had not been crushed by cruelty, and that her capacity for love was boundless. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold. It was the first week of October, and the aspens on the mountainsides had turned to gold. Reverend Miller, a jovial man with a bushy white beard, arrived at noon and set up in the common room of the boarding house. Willa stood before him in her new blue dress, her dark hair pinned up with wildflowers that Quincy had picked for her that morning. Quincy stood beside her in his best clothes, buckskin pants and a clean shirt that Mrs. Sullivan had managed to find that fit his massive frame. He had trimmed his beard and tied back his long hair, and Willa thought she had never seen a more handsome man. Nearly the entire town crowded into the room to witness their union. Mrs. Sullivan stood beside Willa as her witness, and Mr. Chen stood beside Quincy. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, and when Reverend Miller pronounced them husband and wife, Quincy kissed Willa with such tender passion that several of the women in the crowd sighed with happiness. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful. There was food and music, with Mrs. Sullivan's son bringing out a fiddle and playing lively tunes. People danced and laughed, and Willa found herself swept up in the happiness of it all. She danced with Quincy, his strong arms supporting her weight as he spun her carefully around the room, mindful of her belly. "Are you happy?" Quincy asked her as they swayed to a slower song. "More than I ever thought possible," Willa said honestly. "This morning, I woke up alone. Tonight, I will go to sleep as your wife. It feels like a miracle." "You are the miracle," Quincy said, his gray eyes intense. "You took a heart that had been frozen for years and thawed it. You gave me a reason to come down from the mountains. You gave me a family." Willa pressed her face against his broad chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "We gave those things to each other." As the sun set and the celebration wound down, Quincy carried Willa back to their cabin despite her laughing protests that she could walk perfectly well. He set her down gently inside and lit the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. "I have something for you," Quincy said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small carved wooden box and handed it to her. Willa opened it to find a delicate necklace made of silver, with a pendant shaped like a mountain peak. Quincy, it is beautiful. Where did you get this?" "I made it," he said, looking almost shy. "I'm not much of a silversmith, but I wanted you to have something to remind you that you are as strong as the mountains, that you endured and survived and came out the other side." Willa's eyes filled with tears. She turned so he could fasten it around her neck, the metal cool against her skin. "I will treasure it always." That night, they came together as husband and wife, with a passion tempered by tenderness. Quincy treated Willa as though she were spun glass, constantly checking that she was comfortable, that the baby was safe. Willa had never felt so cherished, so completely loved. In his arms, the last shadows of shame and hurt finally fell away, replaced by a joy so pure it almost hurt. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed. Quincy's large hand splayed protectively over her belly. "I felt the baby move," he said with wonder in his voice, "right there, like a little kick." "That happens more and more now," Willa said, covering his hand with hers. "I think the baby knows you, knows it is safe." "I will protect both of you with my life," Quincy vowed. "I will build you the best home I can. I will hunt and trap and work to make sure you never want for anything. I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I know," Willa whispered, "and I will love you just as fiercely. I will make our house a home. I will raise our children to be strong and kind like their father. I will stand beside you through whatever comes." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who had found each other against all odds. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Willa's life. Quincy was true to his word about building them a proper home. He found a spot just at the edge of town, near enough to the community, but with a view of the mountains he loved. With help from the men of Silver Ridge, he began constructing a larger cabin with 2 rooms, one for sleeping and one for living. Willa watched him work, marveling at his strength and skill. He could fell a tree and strip it to logs in half the time it took other men. He could lift beams that required 3 others to carry. His hands, so large and calloused, could fit logs together with precision and care. "You're staring," Quincy said one afternoon, grinning at her as he wiped sweat from his brow. "Can you blame me? My husband is the strongest man in the territory," Willa teased back. "Your husband is showing off for his wife," Quincy admitted. He climbed down from the roof he had been framing and walked over to her, pulling her into his arms. "How are you feeling? Is the baby behaving?" "The baby is very active today," Willa said, guiding his hand to where she could feel movement. "I think it likes watching you work too." Quincy's face softened with that look of wonder she loved so much. "I cannot wait to meet this little one, to hold my son or daughter." "Do you have a preference?" Willa asked. "I want a healthy baby and a healthy wife," Quincy said firmly. "That's all I pray for." The cabin was finished by the end of October, just as the first snows began to dust the high peaks. It was beautiful and sturdy, with a large stone fireplace that Quincy promised would keep them warm all winter, glass windows that let in the light, and a real wood floor instead of packed dirt. The men of the town helped them move in, and the women arrived with housewarming gifts, quilts and dishes, jars of preserves, and bags of flour. "This is what a community should be," Willa said to Quincy that night as they lay in their new bed in their new home. "People caring for each other." "This is what you deserve," Quincy corrected, "what you always deserved." November arrived with cold winds and gray skies. Willa's belly was enormous now, and moving became difficult. Quincy hovered over her constantly, worried that she would overexert herself. He brought in Mrs. Sullivan to check on her regularly, and the older woman assured them both that everything seemed to be progressing normally. "First babies can be tricky," Mrs. Sullivan warned, "but you are young and strong, Willa. You will do just fine." The baby came on a snowy night in mid-November. Willa woke Quincy with a gasp, her hand clutching her belly. "I think it is time." Quincy was up and moving before she finished speaking. He built up the fire, set water to boil, and ran through the snow to fetch Mrs. Sullivan and the town's midwife, a quiet woman named Sarah who had delivered dozens of babies over the years. The labor was long and difficult. Willa had never known pain like this, waves of agony that crashed over her again and again. Quincy stayed by her side the entire time, letting her squeeze his hands until she thought she might break them, wiping her face with cool cloths, whispering encouragement in her ear. "You are the strongest woman I know," he told her as dawn light began to filter through the windows. "You can do this. I am right here with you." "I am so tired," Willa gasped. "I know, my love, but you are almost there. Our baby is almost here." With a final tremendous effort, Willa pushed and felt the baby slip free. A lusty cry filled the cabin, the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. "It is a boy," Sarah announced, wrapping the baby in clean cloths. "A big, healthy boy." She placed the baby in Willa's arms, and Willa looked down at her son with overwhelming love. He had a cap of dark hair and gray eyes that seemed to look right at her. He was perfect. "Quincy, look at him," she breathed. Quincy stared at his son with tears streaming down his weathered face. "He is beautiful, perfect, like his mother." "What should we name him?" Willa asked. "I was thinking," Quincy said tentatively, "if you would not mind, I would like to name him Emmett, after my sister Emma, so that some part of her could live on in something good and beautiful." Willa felt her heart swell with love for this man who was so tender beneath his rough exterior. Emmett Whitmore. I think that is a perfect name. They spent the rest of that day in a haze of exhaustion and joy, learning how to care for their tiny son. Quincy was surprisingly adept at changing nappies and swaddling, though his huge hands made everything look comically small. "I am terrified I'm going to break him," Quincy admitted as he held Emmett that evening, the baby looking impossibly tiny against his broad chest. "You will not," Willa assured him. "You are being so gentle. He is safe with you." As if to prove her point, Emmett yawned and settled into sleep against his father's chest, his tiny hand curled against Quincy's shirt. "I never thought I could feel like this," Quincy said quietly. "Like my heart is walking around outside my body, like I would face down a grizzly with my bare hands to protect this little person." "That is what love is," Willa said, reaching out to take Quincy's hand. "That fierce, protective, overwhelming feeling. I feel it for both of you." The winter was hard that year, with heavy snows that sometimes kept them trapped in the cabin for days at a time. But Willa had never been happier. Their little home was warm and safe, filled with the sounds of a baby's cries and coos, with Quincy's deep laughter and Willa's soft singing. Quincy proved to be a devoted father, walking Emmett around the cabin when he was fussy, talking to him about the mountains and animals as though the baby could understand. Willa would watch them together and feel such gratitude that sometimes it brought her to tears. "Why are you crying?" Quincy asked one evening, noticing her tears. "Because I am so happy," Willa explained. "Because a year ago I was alone and scared and thought my life was over. Now I have a husband I adore, and a beautiful son, and a home and a community that cares about us. It is almost too much joy to contain." Quincy set Emmett in his cradle and pulled Willa into his arms. "You deserve every bit of this happiness and more. You are the strongest, bravest, most loving woman I have ever known. You took a life that seemed broken and turned it into something beautiful." "We did that together," Willa insisted. "You saved me, Quincy. You came into Ordway and rescued me when no one else would." "No," Quincy said firmly. "You saved yourself by having the courage to leave. I just provided the means, and Willa, you saved me too. You gave me a reason to rejoin the world. You showed me that not everyone is cruel. You taught me how to love again." They kissed then, soft and sweet, while Emmett slept peacefully in his cradle and the snow fell gently outside their windows. Spring came late to the mountains, but when it finally arrived, it was glorious. The snow melted, revealing wildflowers that carpeted the meadows in brilliant colors. Willa planted her garden, with Emmett in a sling against her chest as she worked. Quincy continued his trapping and hunting, but he never went far from home, always returning by evening. One afternoon in May, as Willa was hanging laundry and Quincy was repairing the fence, a stranger rode into Silver Ridge. Willa did not think much of it at first. The town sometimes got travelers passing through, prospectors heading to the mining camps, or traders moving goods between settlements. But then she recognized the horse, a distinctive chestnut with a white blaze. Her blood ran cold. That was Thomas Grayson's horse. She must have made a sound because Quincy was instantly at her side. "What is wrong?" "That man," Willa said, her voice shaking. "The one who just rode in. I think that is Thomas, the baby's father." Quincy's entire body tensed, his hands curling into fists. "Stay here." "Quincy, do not do anything rash," Willa pleaded, grabbing his arm. He looked down at her, and his expression softened slightly. "I will not start trouble, but I will make sure he understands that you are under my protection now." Quincy strode toward town with Willa following nervously behind, Emmett heavy in her arms. By the time they reached the general store where the stranger had dismounted, a small crowd had gathered. The man was indeed Thomas Grayson, looking older and more haggard than Willa remembered. His fine clothes were dusty from travel, and there were shadows under his eyes. He was tying his horse to the hitching post when he looked up and saw Willa. His face drained of color. "Willa?" "Hello, Thomas," Willa said, her voice steadier than she felt. Thomas's eyes dropped to the baby in her arms, and something like regret flickered across his face. "Is that my child?" Before Willa could answer, Quincy stepped between them, his massive form blocking Thomas's view. "That is her son, her and mine. You lost any claim when you abandoned her." Thomas looked up at Quincy and seemed to shrink, suddenly aware of the size and power of the man before him. "I did not know what else to do. My father, he sent me away." "You were a coward," Quincy said flatly. "You used her and threw her away when it became inconvenient. Now, what are you doing here?" "I came looking for Willa," Thomas admitted. "I heard from someone passing through Ordway that she had left town with a mountain man. I wanted to find her to make things right." "Make things right?" Willa's voice was incredulous. She stepped around Quincy to face Thomas directly. "You abandoned me when I needed you most. You let your father destroy my reputation. You left me to face the town alone. And now, months later, you want to make things right?" "I made a mistake," Thomas said, and there were tears in his eyes. "I was weak and afraid. My father controlled everything. But I am free of him now. I want to marry you, Willa. I want to claim my child and give you both my name." Willa stared at him in disbelief. "You think I would want that? You think I would leave the man who loved me when I had nothing, who gave me and my son a home, who married me and claimed my child as his own, for the man who threw me away?" "But that is my child," Thomas insisted. "My blood." "No," Quincy said, his voice like iron. "That is my son. I was there when he was born. I held his mother's hand through the labor. I was the first to hold him. I get up with him in the night. I will teach him to walk and talk and be a good man. Blood does not make a father. Love makes a father." Emmett chose that moment to make a sound, and Quincy reached out to take him from Willa's arms. The baby settled immediately against his father's chest, his tiny hand curling into Quincy's shirt. The image was powerful. This massive, strong man holding an infant with such tender care. Thomas looked at them, at Willa standing close to Quincy's side, at the baby peaceful in the mountain man's arms, and something seemed to break in him. "I see. I'm too late." "You were too late the moment you walked away from me in Ordway," Willa said. There was no anger in her voice anymore, just a calm certainty. "I loved you once, Thomas. I thought we would build a life together. But you showed me who you really are when things got difficult. Quincy showed me what real love looks like. It looks like staying. It looks like protecting. It looks like choosing someone every single day, not just when it is convenient." "I am sorry," Thomas said quietly, "for all of it. You deserved better from me." "I did," Willa agreed, "but I'm not angry anymore. I am grateful. If you had stayed, if you had married me, I never would have met Quincy. I never would have come to Silver Ridge. I never would have found real happiness. So in a strange way, your abandonment was the best thing that could have happened to me." Thomas flinched at that, but nodded. "Is there anything I can do for the child?" "His name is Emmett," Willa said firmly. "And no, he has everything he needs. He has a father who loves him, a mother who adores him, and a community that supports him. That is more than many children ever get." Thomas stood there for a long moment, looking at the life he had thrown away. Finally, he nodded. "Then I wish you all happiness, truly. You were right about me, Willa. I was a coward. I hope that someday I can become the kind of man who deserves someone like you." He mounted his horse and rode away without looking back. Willa watched him go and felt only relief. That chapter of her life was finally completely closed. Quincy handed Emmett back to her and wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Are you all right?" "I'm perfect," Willa said honestly. "Seeing him just made me realize how far I have come, how different my life is now. I do not regret anything because it all led me to you." "You are sure you do not wish I had let you talk to him more?" "He said he wanted to marry you, give you his name. That was what you wanted once." Willa turned to face her husband fully, cupping his bearded cheek with her free hand. "What I wanted once was a dream, an illusion. What I have now is real. You are real. Your love is real. This life we are building is real. I do not want Thomas Grayson's name. I am proud to be Willa Whitmore." Quincy kissed her there in the middle of the street, in front of the whole town, and Willa heard Mrs. Sullivan's delighted laugh and Mr. Chen's approving words. This was her home. These were her people. And this man was her heart. The years that followed were full and rich. Willa continued to help Mrs. Sullivan at the boarding house until she became pregnant again, this time delivering a daughter they named Eliza in the summer of 1880. 2 years after that, another son arrived, whom they called James. The cabin that Quincy had built was expanded twice to accommodate their growing family. Quincy proved to be as devoted to his daughters as he was to his sons. He could be seen carrying little Eliza on his shoulders through town, her laughter ringing out as she pretended to be tall as a mountain. He taught Emmett to track and hunt, but he also taught him to read and write, using the books that Willa had brought from Ordway. Willa thrived in Silver Ridge. She eventually took over teaching the town's children when the previous teacher moved away, using the skills her father had taught her. She held classes in the boarding house's common room, teaching reading and arithmetic to a dozen students ranging from 6 to 16. The town itself grew slowly but steadily. More families arrived, drawn by word that Silver Ridge was a place where people were judged by their character rather than their past. A church was built and a proper schoolhouse. The general store expanded. Silver Ridge became known throughout the territory as a haven for those seeking a fresh start. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Quincy took Willa up into the mountains to his old camp, the one he had lived in before she came into his life. They left the children with Mrs. Sullivan and rode up on horseback, carrying blankets and food. The camp was as he had left it, just a simple lean-to and a fire ring, surrounded by towering pines. But the view was breathtaking, overlooking the valley with Silver Ridge nestled below and mountains stretching to the horizon in every direction. "This is where I lived for so many years," Quincy said as they sat by the fire that evening, wrapped in blankets against the mountain chill. "I thought I was content here, alone with just the animals and the silence." "Were you content?" Willa asked. "I thought I was, but I was really just hiding. Hiding from the pain of losing Emma, hiding from the cruelty I had seen in the world, hiding from the possibility of being hurt again." He pulled her closer against his side. "You taught me that hiding is not the same as living. You taught me that love is worth the risk of pain. You taught me that people can be good and kind if you give them the chance." "You taught me those same things," Willa said softly. "When everyone I knew turned their backs on me, I thought that was just how the world was, that people were fundamentally cruel. But you showed me different. You showed me that there are still heroes in this world, still people who will stand up for what is right, even when it costs them something." "Loving you has never cost me anything," Quincy said. "It has only given me everything." They made love under the stars that night, with the mountains watching over them and the wind singing through the pines. Willa felt such joy, such perfect contentment, that she thought her heart might burst. "I want you to know something," she said as they lay tangled together afterward. "If I could go back and change things, if I could make it so I never went through all that pain in Ordway, I would not, because every moment of suffering led me to you, and you are worth all of it." Quincy's arms tightened around her. "You never have to go through anything alone again. Whatever comes, we face it together." "Together," Willa agreed. They returned to Silver Ridge the next day to find their children had been perfect angels for Mrs. Sullivan, though Willa suspected the older woman was exaggerating slightly. Emmett, now 6, had grown tall and strong like his father. Eliza at 3 was a wild sprite with her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes. Baby James was just learning to walk, stumbling around the cabin with determined steps. Watching Quincy play with their children, seeing him get down on the floor to let James climb on him like he was a mountain, hearing him patiently answer Eliza's endless questions, feeling Emmett's small hand slip into hers as they walked through town, Willa felt such profound gratitude that it brought tears to her eyes. "Why do you cry, Mama?" Emmett asked, noticing her expression. "Because I am so happy," Willa explained, the same answer she'd given his father so many times. "Because I love you all so very much." "We love you too," Emmett said seriously. "Papa says you are the bravest person he knows." "Your papa is biased," Willa said with a laugh. "What is biased?" Eliza demanded, never one to let a new word pass without investigation. "It means he loves me so much that he thinks I am better than I really am," Willa explained. "But you are the best," Eliza insisted. "You're the best mama in the whole world." Quincy looked up from where he was lying on the floor, with James standing triumphantly on his chest. "She is right, you know. You are the best." As winter approached that year, Willa received an unexpected letter. It had been forwarded from Ordway to Silver Ridge, and she almost did not open it, afraid of what poison it might contain. But curiosity won out. The letter was from Mrs. Hendricks, the woman who had refused to serve her in the general store. It was short and stilted, clearly difficult for the woman to write. "Dear Mrs. Whitmore," it read, "I am writing to tell you that much has changed in Ordway since you left. Thomas Grayson returned and told everyone the truth about what happened between you, that he abandoned you and let you take the blame. The town is ashamed of how we treated you. I am ashamed. I am writing to apologize for my cruelty and to ask your forgiveness, though I know I do not deserve it. I hope you have found happiness wherever you are. You deserved far better than what we gave you." Willa read the letter twice, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Part of her wanted to feel vindicated, to gloat that she had been right and they had been wrong. But mostly, she just felt sad for all the time and energy that had been wasted on judgment and cruelty. She showed the letter to Quincy that evening. He read it carefully and then looked at her. "How do you feel about this?" "Strange," Willa admitted. "It is too late, obviously. The apology does not change what happened, but I think I am glad she wrote it anyway. It means maybe they learned something. Maybe they will treat the next person better." "Are you going to write back?" Willa thought about it for a long moment. "Yes. I'm going to tell her that I forgive her. Not because she deserves it, but because holding on to anger hurts me more than it hurts her. And I'm going to tell her about Silver Ridge, about how wonderful it is here. Maybe if more people knew places like this existed, they would try to make their own towns more like it." She did write back, a gracious letter that spoke of forgiveness and hope. She told Mrs. Hendricks about her husband and children, about the community that had welcomed her. She did not gloat or preach. She simply shared her happiness. Mrs. Hendricks wrote back months later with a shorter note saying that she had read Willa's letter to the whole town and that many people had been moved by it. Some changes were being made in Ordway, she said. The church was starting to focus more on compassion than judgment. People were looking out for each other more. Willa felt pleased by that. She would never return to Ordway, but knowing that some good had come from her suffering gave it a meaning she had not expected. The children grew. Emmett became a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books as much as hunting. Eliza grew into a spirited girl who was afraid of nothing, climbing trees and catching frogs with equal enthusiasm. James was sweet-natured and gentle, always bringing his mother flowers and telling her stories. In 1884, Willa found herself pregnant again, and in the spring of 1885, she delivered twin girls, whom they named Rose and Lily. Quincy held both babies at once, one in each massive arm, and declared himself the luckiest man in the Colorado Territory. Their home was always full of noise and laughter, of children's voices and the sounds of living. Quincy expanded the cabin yet again, adding a loft where the older boys slept and another bedroom for the girls. He had mostly given up his long trapping expeditions into the high country, preferring to stay close to home. He worked as a guide sometimes, leading prospectors and hunters into the mountains, but he was always home by dark. His family was his world now. Willa watched her children grow and thrive and felt such pride. Emmett was 12 now, tall and lean and smart. He had never known that Quincy was not his biological father, and Quincy had never treated him any differently than the other children. To everyone in Silver Ridge, Emmett was a Whitmore through and through. One day, as Emmett helped Quincy repair the roof, Willa overheard their conversation. "Papa," Emmett said, "some of the boys at school were talking about how I look different than you and Mama. They said maybe I'm adopted or something." Willa froze, her heart in her throat. They had always planned to tell Emmett the truth someday, but not yet. He was still so young, but Quincy handled it with his usual wisdom. "You are my son in every way that matters, Emmett. I was there when you were born. I have been your papa since you were hours old. But you are right that I am not your biological father. Your mama was courted by another man before she met me, a man who made her promises and then broke them. When she needed him most, he was not there. I was. I chose to be your papa, and I would make that choice again every single day." There was a long silence. Then Emmett said, his voice small, "Do you think he ever thinks about me, my real father?" "I am your real father," Quincy said firmly. "Being a father is about more than biology. It is about showing up every day. It is about loving your child, no matter what. It is about teaching them and protecting them and being there when they need you. I have done all those things for you, and I always will." "I know," Emmett said, and Willa could hear the emotion in his voice. "I am glad you are my papa. I would not want anyone else. And I am glad you are my son, my firstborn. You made me a father, Emmett. You taught me how to love in a whole new way. I will always be grateful for that." Willa wiped tears from her eyes and went back to her cooking, her heart full. She'd been afraid that the truth would hurt Emmett, but Quincy had handled it perfectly. Their son knew he was loved, and that was what mattered. The years continued to pass. Silver Ridge prospered. A railroad spur was built nearby, making it easier to get goods in and out. More families arrived. The town got a proper school building, and Willa became the official teacher, paid a modest salary by the territorial government. Quincy's skills as a guide became legendary. People came from all over seeking his services. He was known as a man who could track anything, who knew every inch of the mountains, who could keep parties safe even in the worst weather. He charged fair prices and gave half his earnings to help build up the town. On their 15th wedding anniversary, the town threw them a celebration. Nearly 100 people crowded into the expanded boarding house to honor the couple who had become pillars of the community. Mrs. Sullivan, now in her 70s but still spry, stood to give a speech. When Quincy brought Willa to Silver Ridge all those years ago, she was broken and scared, and he was a wild man from the mountains who barely spoke to anyone. But together, they showed us all what love really looks like. They showed us that family is not just about blood. They showed us that the best communities are built on compassion and acceptance. Silver Ridge is what it is today because of their example. We are all better for knowing them. Willa stood to respond, with Quincy beside her and their 5 children arranged around them. Emmett was nearly 17 now, a young man who looked like his mother, but had his father's steady presence. Eliza at 14 was beautiful and fierce. James at 12 was already showing signs of being even bigger than Quincy, with a gentle heart to match. The twins Rose and Lily, now 6, held their parents' hands and grinned at the crowd. 15 years ago, Willa said, her voice clear and strong, I thought my life was over. I'd been cast out by everyone I knew, left alone and afraid. Then Quincy Whitmore walked into my life and changed everything. He did not just save me. He showed me that I was worth saving. He loved me when I could not love myself. He gave me a family and a home and a community that accepts me for who I am. Everything good in my life started the day he chopped my firewood in Ordway and decided I was worth fighting for. She turned to look at her husband, this mountain of a man with gray in his beard now and lines around his eyes. You are my hero, Quincy Whitmore. You are the love of my life, and I will spend every day for the rest of my life showing you how grateful I am that you chose me. Quincy pulled her into his arms and kissed her in front of the whole town, and the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. That night, after the celebration, after the children were in bed, Quincy and Willa sat on their porch and looked up at the stars. Do you ever regret it? Willa asked. Giving up your solitary life in the mountains for all of this chaos and noise and responsibility? Not for a single second, Quincy said without hesitation. I thought I was happy alone, but I was really just surviving. You taught me the difference between surviving and living, between existing and thriving. This chaos and noise and responsibility is the greatest gift I've ever been given. Even when the twins are screaming and Eliza is climbing on the roof and James accidentally lets the chickens out and Emmett is practicing his reading at full volume, Willa teased. Quincy laughed, that deep rumble she loved so much. Especially then. Those are the moments when I am most aware of how blessed I am. Every gray hair you and the children give me is earned through joy. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands clasped, watching the moon rise over the mountains. I think about that girl I was sometimes, Willa said quietly. That scared, shamed girl in Ordway. I wish I could go back and tell her that everything would be all right, that all the pain was leading somewhere beautiful. She would not have believed you, Quincy said wisely. She needed to walk the path herself, to learn her own strength, but I think she would be proud of who you became. I think she would be grateful to you, Willa corrected, for seeing past the shame to the woman beneath, for believing in her when no one else would. I am grateful to her too, Quincy said, because she was brave enough to leave Ordway, brave enough to trust a stranger, brave enough to love again after being hurt. Without her courage, we would not be here. Willa leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent of pine and leather and home. I love you, Quincy Whitmore. Today, tomorrow, and forever. And I love you, Willa Whitmore. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. The years continued their gentle march. Emmett grew into a fine young man who decided to study law, heading to Denver for his education with his parents' blessing and pride. He wrote long letters home, telling them about his studies and the girl he was courting, a lawyer's daughter named Alice, who sounded lovely. Eliza shocked no one by declaring her intention to become a doctor. It was 1890, and women physicians were rare but not unheard of. Quincy and Willa supported her ambitions fully, saving money to send her to medical school. James took after his father, loving the mountains and the outdoors. He apprenticed with Quincy as a guide, learning the trade. The twins Rose and Lily were still young, but already showing distinct personalities. Rose loved books and drawing, while Lily was fascinated by how things worked, constantly taking apart clocks and tools to see their inner mechanisms. On a crisp autumn day in 1893, Quincy and Willa celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary quietly, just the two of them. The older children were scattered across the territory pursuing their dreams, while the twins were staying with Mrs. Sullivan for the night. They rode up to Quincy's old camp in the mountains, the place where they had come on their 5th anniversary. The lean-to was gone now, reclaimed by weather and time, but the view was just as breathtaking. 20 years, Willa marveled. It seems like yesterday and like a lifetime ago all at once. I remember every moment, Quincy said, every smile, every laugh, every tear. Every time you held our babies, every time you taught a child to read, every time you looked at me like I hung the moon. They are all treasured memories. We have built a good life, Willa said contentedly, better than I ever dreamed possible. The best life, Quincy agreed, and we are not done yet. We have grandchildren to spoil someday, more years to spend together, more adventures to have. What adventures? We are old now, Willa teased. She was 42, her dark hair now streaked with silver. Quincy was 50, his beard more gray than brown. Old? We are just getting started. Quincy pulled her to her feet and spun her around, making her laugh. I plan to love you for at least another 50 years. Only 50? Willa challenged. You are right. Better make it 60 to be safe. They held each other as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. The mountains stood eternal around them, witnesses to their love story. A year later, Emmett married his Alice in a beautiful ceremony in Denver. Willa and Quincy traveled there with all the children, bursting with pride as they watched their oldest son pledge his life to a lovely young woman who clearly adored him. At the reception, Alice pulled Willa aside. Emmett told me about his birth, about how Quincy is not his biological father. Willa tensed, unsure what to expect, but Alice smiled. I just wanted to tell you how beautiful I think that is. How lucky Emmett is to have been raised by a man who chose to love him, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Quincy is the kind of father and husband I hope Emmett will be. Willa felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you. That means more than you know. And I wanted to tell you that I admire you so much, Alice continued. Emmett told me what you went through, how brave you were to leave your home and start over. You are an inspiration. Willa hugged this young woman who would be her daughter-in-law, grateful that Emmett had found someone so kind and understanding. Within 2 years, Willa and Quincy were grandparents twice over. Emmett and Alice had a daughter they named Willa Jane, and Eliza, now married to a fellow medical student, had a son named Quincy Michael. Willa held her tiny granddaughter and her grandson and felt the circle of life complete itself in the most beautiful way. You would have loved this, Emma, Quincy whispered one night as he held his grandson. You would have loved seeing how life can turn out when people choose love over fear. Willa came to stand beside him, looking down at the sleeping baby. I think she knows, she said softly. I think she is watching, proud of the man you became and the family we built. Time continued its forward motion, as it always does. James married a girl from Silver Ridge named Sarah, the daughter of the town's blacksmith. The twins grew into young women, Rose pursuing art in San Francisco, and Lily becoming an engineer, one of the first women in the field. Quincy and Willa grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They moved a bit slower now, but they still took walks through Silver Ridge every evening, hand in hand. They still sat on their porch watching sunsets. They still looked at each other with the same love that had bloomed all those years ago. In 1905, on their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered in Silver Ridge. All 5 children came with their spouses and children, filling the house with noise and laughter. There were 10 grandchildren now, ranging from infant to teenager, and they adored their grandfather Quincy, who still told the best stories and gave the best hugs. The town threw another celebration, even bigger than the one 15 years earlier. Silver Ridge had grown to nearly 500 people, and it seemed like every one of them showed up to honor the couple who had helped shape their community. The current mayor, a man named Robert who had come to Silver Ridge as a child and grown up under Willa's teaching, stood to speak. Quincy and Willa Whitmore represent everything that is good about Silver Ridge. They showed us that we are defined not by our past mistakes, but by how we choose to live in the present. They showed us that family is what we make it, that love is stronger than judgment, and that kindness can change lives. They are the heart of this town, and we are honored to celebrate them. Willa, now 52 with silver hair and smile lines around her eyes, stood with Quincy, now 62 with a fully gray beard and a few more wrinkles. They were surrounded by their children and grandchildren, by the community they had helped build. 30 years ago, Willa said, her voice still strong and clear, I was a different person. I was broken and afraid, convinced that my life was over before it truly began. Then, this man, this wonderful, strong, gentle man, appeared in my life like an angel and showed me that it was just beginning. Every year with him has been a gift. Every child we raised, every friend we made, every sunset we watched together has been a treasure. If I could go back and do it all again, I would not change a single thing, because every step led me to him and to this life we built together. She turned to Quincy, taking both his hands in hers. You saved me, not just from Ordway, but from myself. You taught me how to love again, how to trust again, how to hope again. You gave me a family and a home and a lifetime of happiness. I love you more today than I did 30 years ago, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. Thank you for choosing me. Quincy's eyes were wet with tears. Willa, my heart, my home, you saved me too. You brought me down from the mountains and taught me how to live among people again. You showed me that love is worth the risk, that family is worth fighting for, that life is meant to be lived fully and with an open heart. Everything I am, everything I have, everything I love is because you came into my life and refused to let me hide anymore. I love you beyond words, beyond reason, beyond time itself. He kissed her then, in front of their children and grandchildren and the whole town, and the crowd erupted in applause and cheers. That night, after the celebration ended, and the house finally quieted down with children and grandchildren tucked into every available sleeping space, Quincy and Willa walked out to their porch one more time. The mountains stood dark against a star-filled sky, the same mountains that had witnessed every step of their journey together. Do you remember that first night in Ordway? Quincy asked. When I chopped your wood and you came out to see who I was? I thought you were the biggest man I'd ever seen, Willa admitted with a laugh. And the scariest. You did not look scared. You looked tired and sad and a little bit curious. I was all those things. And I was also wondering why a stranger would help me when everyone else had turned away. I could not walk away, Quincy said simply. Not from you, not then, not ever. And I could not stay in Ordway, Willa said. I had to be brave enough to leave, to trust you, to take a chance on something new. We both had to be brave, Quincy agreed. We both had to choose love over fear. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the night sounds of the mountains. Inside the house, they could hear the soft breathing of sleeping children and grandchildren, the gentle sounds of the family they had created. When I think about everything that happened, Willa said softly, all the pain and shame and fear I went through in Ordway, I can honestly say I'm grateful for it now. Not because it was not horrible, because it was. but because it brought me here. It brought me to you. And this life we have built together is worth every moment of suffering I endured to get here." "I feel the same," Quincy said. "Every lonely year I spent in the mountains, every bit of grief I carried over Emma, every time I pulled away from people because I was afraid to be hurt again, all of it led me to that moment when I heard about you and decided to help. That was the best decision I ever made." "What do you think happens next?" Willa asked. "We have raised our children. They have started families of their own. What is our next chapter?" "This," Quincy said simply. "More of this, growing old together, spoiling our grandchildren, watching Silver Ridge continue to grow, taking care of each other, loving each other more with every day that passes. That is all I need." "That sounds perfect," Willa agreed. They went inside eventually, climbing into bed in the room they had shared for 30 years. Quincy pulled Willa close, her back against his chest, his arm around her waist. They fit together perfectly, as they always had. "Sweet dreams, my love," Quincy murmured. "Sweet dreams," Willa echoed. As she drifted off to sleep, Willa thought about the girl she had been, standing alone in Ordway with no hope and no future. She wished she could reach back through time and tell that girl that everything would be all right. That pain was not the end of the story, but the beginning of something beautiful. That love would find her when she least expected it, that she would build a life so full of joy and family and purpose that the hard times would fade to distant memory. But that girl would not have believed it. She needed to walk her own path, to find her own strength, to discover that she was capable of more than she ever imagined. And Willa was grateful for every step of that journey, because every single one had led her home. Home to Quincy, to their children, to Silver Ridge, to this life of love and happiness and belonging. She had been the woman who was shamed by the town, but the mountain man had taken her away to a town that loved her. And in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift of all, the gift of a second chance, the gift of hope, the gift of love. And that love had sustained them through 30 years and would sustain them through whatever years remained. Because true love does not fade with time. It grows stronger, deeper, more precious with every passing day. As Willa drifted into sleep in her husband's arms, surrounded by family in the home they had built together, she smiled. Her story had started with shame and ended with joy. She had been lost and had been found. She had been broken and had been healed. And she had been loved, truly, deeply, completely loved. That was the greatest triumph of all, the end.